you go to a lot of these events, you go to a lot of kind of the industry conferences, and you hear companies like mine and kind of companies very similar to ours, it's very common to hear things about like the explosion of digital or the increase in spend in digital and consumers taking in more and more content that way. And it's something we really come up to talk about like ROI, case studies, and things that are kind of important around those sort of pieces, or any campaign or any kind of event you've gone to in the last year and a half, I'm sure has been about automation and kind of the growth around programmatic, and it's probably impossible to actually avoid that as a topic. I'm going to mention it once today to kind of keep your streak going, but I promise only once, kind of as part of that. But as we see these things really grow and sort of change in the marketplace, we've actually seen ourselves starting to have very kind of unique and different conversations with very large brands. Not anymore about like, should I get into digital? That was 10 years ago. Should I increase how much I spend in digital? That's been the last 6, 7, 8 years for us. Now we're seeing very large brands start to think about very quickly and commonly, should we actually be going into digital completely and using that as our sole mechanism for advertising? We're finding ourselves in very kind of interesting conversations with very large brands at very high levels. So I wanted to come on today and talk about a little bit was these notions of, should you do that? And kind of thinking about who's in the audience here today. You know, a lot of you kind of see inventory and kind of see media across all different channels. Some of you are focused just on digital, but are actually going out and trying to either fight for dollars within your brand or looking for ways to really try to understand, can we take this in and be successful? So what I wanted to give you today were basically 10 kind of key questions to ask, or kind of things we're seeing come up a lot with brands that'd be important for you before you make kind of a move like that. Because getting out of linear TV, as you can imagine, is a very, very bold move. Now, if I had any kind of comedic sense here or the budget to bring a band, I could have made this some sort of like top 10 list, something kind of fun. I have none of those things. What I do have is basically a fear of what would happen when I kind of realized where we were going to for this event if I were to get out of this lodge and go out and actually try to get on one of those slopes or get on one of those snowmobiles. So what I wanted to do instead was at least try to tie into this some safety tips for me if I do get a little kind of gutsy and leave here tomorrow, as well for you, kind of understanding from a ski standpoint the safety around that and kind of the analog you'll have when you think about getting into potentially an all-digital strategy. So firstly, one of the key questions you're going to have to ask around this notion of is just how talented is my digital creative agency where I'm going to go this way? And I don't mean talented in the sense of creating flashy ads or talented in the sense of having funny ads, whatever those things might be. Obviously, they can do those sort of things. When you think about television, we've got 40, 50 years of analytics kind of behind this. Brands and their agencies are very comfortable with creating 30s and 15s, and there's a tremendous amount of information in the marketplace to really understand how do I measure this, and then how do I improve it if things are not going well through copy testing, learnings you can kind of do on the back end. It's a great way to work with this sort of thing. Digital's different. Digital, thankfully, is actually evolving to a really great degree, but a lot of things that are kind of coming out of this are new, and they're a little bit more experimental. What you want to think about from your creative agency standpoint is for these newer options, do they have the flexibility to go back and actually understand what would happen if this ad is not effectively working for our marketplace? Can we move? Can we adapt? There's a lot less confidence available in the marketplace around this sort of thing. And if you go all digital, this is a very key port for you. The next thing you got to think about is how important is video in particular to your marketing efforts? And when you think about this notion, video is kind of where all the interesting things are happening right now in the digital space. It's kind of migrated away from TV. It's like consumers have actually evolved or taking in different platforms to a much greater degree. The ads are following. And different kind of strategies and different kind of life cycles you might have for your brands are going to give video either primacy or maybe a smaller aspect as part of this. If it's very important what you do, though, you have to be very cognizant of this notion because online video tends to be on a CPM basis, surprisingly, more expensive than TV. If you're trying to find quality video inventory, it's even more of a challenge. The last thing to think about for this, though, is if you're trying to find quality inventory is also how important is reach in the life cycle you're at as part of this. Reach for digital video is an extreme challenge. And if the question is, can your digital plan, if you were to go that way or go entirely digital, achieve TV-like reach? And the answer, frankly, is most likely not. It's very common and pretty easy now for a national television campaign to achieve 85, 90% reach. If you think about it, it makes some sense. Even though it seems like there's hundreds of channels available and all these places to put advertising, we're always trying to dodge commercials in the TV space, there's only a couple hundred places out there. There are fewer fewer places for people actually to consume that content and to see ads. And for all the things you hear about kind of the change in the consumer's usage of digital and that sort of thing, it's not happening at the expense of TV. It's still a huge, huge reach mechanism in the marketplace. We've done about 50,000 studies campaigns we've studied actually right now to try to understand the reach for digital. And what we've learned in that space actually is that even the best campaigns, the largest campaigns in the digital space, struggle to achieve more than about 60% reach. This is a really key point because studies tend to show that there's a linear correlation between targeted reach and sales. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're capping reach, you are potentially limiting sales. And here's kind of an easy tee up for digital itself, though, which the question is okay, if I'm going to make this move, can I target and find my ideal audience? And the answer here, obviously, is yes, but with some kind of key caveats behind this sort of thing. Digital offers huge advantages. TV's talked a lot about trying to get beyond demographic reach and trying to introduce things around addressability, some of those challenges around those sort of pieces. Digital, though, was light years ahead of these sort of things. The amount of things you can actually target upon, the variables that are available beyond demos, getting into buyer behavior, purchase intent, it's amazing. There are people out there that will sell you at this point basically anything. If you're trying to target a middle-aged Cub fan who probably spends too much money on craft beer and is in the market for a tablet, they can find me. It's not that hard to try and reach these sort of people. TV does not offer that sort of capability. Here's the caveats, though. The first thing you gotta think about, and this has exploded in the marketplace in the last 2 years, as a lot of you are aware, is this notion of, is the ad itself actually even going to be seen? There are more than a dozen companies now out there that are accredited by the Media Ratings Council measuring this notion of viewability and fraud. We work very closely with a pair of them, and what we've seen in the last couple of years is a little over half of the actual impressions that are served are literally either served to bots or served in places where no one ever is exposed to the ad itself. Now, you paid for that impression. And in our research world, we'll very rarely say something is waste. We might say it's less effective than something else. This is literal waste. If your agency and you aren't really in front of this notion, and you're going heavy into all digital or completely into all digital, this will be a huge challenge you have to get in front of as part of this. And here's the second quandary. There's a notion of, will it actually try to reach the targeted audience at the end of the line? If it's been served, so it's gone to a person, not gone to a bot, at least it's been viewable, the question becomes, okay, we've got all this targeting happening, all this noise in the marketplace helping us target and find people. We should be able to use that kind of notion to have like laser-like focus on a particular audience. What we've learned over the last 4 years or so, measuring about 50,000 campaigns, is that on average, in the digital world, only about 60% of the impressions that are served can even hit the demo target correctly. This is a big challenge. If you think about it in terms of actually looking at a demo someone might buy, like a 15-year age span, let's say, the numbers go down to about 40%. Those were kind of shocking numbers when it first came out. But luckily for all of you in the room at least, the marketplace has evolved behind this sort of thing, adopted these sort of metrics, and are now basically willing to offer guarantees behind demographic reach and frequency. So if you're going heavy into digital, or if you're going all digital, as we're talking about here today, do not at this point go out and invest without a guarantee of reach. Okay, the question comes as you go that route is, are those ads themselves going to be as effective? The answer is maybe. It depends on how you take your money out of television and move it into digital. If you move that money into display, where the bulk of actual inventory and impressions and still tonnage of spend tends to be, you're going to be giving up brand lift, you're going to be giving up sales impact. However, if you go into online, video itself, that tends to perform in the studies that we've looked at much more effectively around brand lift and ultimately sales impact. So it really depends on the mix you're going to take in as part of this. Now, I know a lot of the topics here this week are going to be around collaboration. I heard some things earlier even today around this notion. And the question you have to ask yourself and think about from a relationship standpoint as well is can you optimize your digital plan in flight? And I don't mean technically. Obviously you can. The real benefit you have in digital you don't have in TV is this notion and ability to literally move spots around. To cap frequency, we start to see response flatten out. To work with sites themselves are delivering much greater performance for you on the back sales end, or doing a better job reaching your audience. None of those things are available in television. If you think about it from a large standpoint, if you're buying national TV, the inventory's gone. Most folks have already bought 2016, and the stuff that's left is extremely expensive. So from a technical standpoint, you certainly can do those sort of things. What you have to ask yourself, though, is are you set up to work with your agency, and just as importantly, your major publisher partners to do this sort of optimization? We do a lot of work, a lot of case studies around working with brands and seeing if they do these things effectively, what they can see as a result. And it is not uncommon for brands that are collaboratively optimized with their publisher and their agency to change sales lift by 30%. It's relatively easy to do. We got case studies coming out around this notion as well. And here's kind of the conundrum. Will giving up cross-platform exposure actually affect ad performance? And again, the answer here is maybe. Depends on what you're trying to do. Our studies show that basically in any case, if you're reaching the same person with your ads on both television and in a digital space, you're going to have your greatest impact on sales lift, your greatest impact on brand lift, awareness, all those sort of tools. The same thing holds though true if you actually look at it between digital in the display versus video realm. So when you look at video, it actually can have a very similar impact. So if you look at your mix properly and are working with your agency like in step 8 and really thinking strongly about how should we attack these sort of things, if you're measuring these things and optimizing in flight, moving away from TV may not be giving up, frankly, that much impact for you from an ad performance standpoint. And lastly, the question that tends to rule all questions when we're talking to brands, and I'm sure when you talk to your bosses and the people who control the budget, is what's the cost impact of doing these sort of things? So you mentioned earlier, online video tends to cost more on a CPM basis than television does, and digital tends to cost less. However, digital again offers you strengths you didn't have before. I mentioned off the top this notion of you hear programmatic in basically every campaign, but programmatic and real-time bidding in digital do offer you much greater notions around cost control. It's much easier for you to kind of cap where things are at, have a greater say and a stronger negotiation in where things are going to go. And if you're doing it effectively and balancing video and balancing display, there might be an opportunity for you to have a very similar impact without breaking the back from a cost standpoint. So to kind of wrap this up, this is not an exhaustive list. These are things that we're talking a lot with brands about, things we're hearing them kind of ask us questions behind. But when you think about going heavily into digital or moving all into digital, the fundamentals of advertising and marketing don't really change. We talk about from a standpoint from Nielsen of really understanding reach, resonance, and reaction if you're going to really understand marketing effectiveness. And if you're going into all digital or strongly into digital, you still have to reach the right audience, make sure that's being achieved. You have to generate messages for them that are going to resonate and make sure you're serving them up in environments where they're going to be noticed to have the attitudinal impact you're going to have or want to have. And then lastly, drive consumer reaction. You want to try and drive sales. When you do it in the digital world, it's not any different, it's just more complicated. There are a lot more levers to pull, a lot more collaboration that has to happen, a lot less history and knowledge behind some of the more innovative and newer things that are happening out there, but it can certainly be done. I have 1 minute left, so I don't know if Shireen wants to come out, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any from what I've kind of blown through here today.
Sure. Anybody have any questions? Questions? This one over there.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on going all digital. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on going all digital. But I'm sure when you talk to these brands about going all into digital, their questions are, okay, how do I measure what I'm losing in offline? Mm-hmm. So how do you measure that offline, call it an opportunity cost or loss revenue? Just how do you measure that offline piece that you lost this, but you gained that? I'm sure they ask you that, so.
Yeah, we have a lot of tools. I mentioned kind of the 3R standpoint that we do with, but we actually are measuring kind of all 3 of those pieces. And so we'll run scenarios, and a lot of times candidates or clients themselves will work together and do almost A/B testing at the same time. One run campaign is slightly different and move it off and see what the sales impact might be. The benefit and nicest we have in the digital world is we can actually see results quickly. If we're looking at longitudinal studies over time, we've got a whole bank of things to help them understand what their strategies and TVs have been, work with their mixed modelers and those sort of pieces to understand what those levers might be. In the digital world and making the quick moves, we can measure sales impact almost as quickly as we can reach and resonance. And that allows us then to really understand, like, what did we give up? Was pulling lever A the right one to do, or was pulling lever B a better choice? The benefit becomes, since we know this in near real time, they can actually activate and kind of course correct more quickly than they might have been able to do historically.
Awesome. Great. Lance, we're out of time, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to get into a